Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. It's the last day of the All-Star break. The Wolves are back in action tonight. Today on the show, we will preview Wolves Bucks. Can't wait for the Wolves to hit the floor again. I want to close out the All-Star break, though, by talking about my biggest concern about the Wolves, the biggest question I have sitting here right now about the Wolves, and also the most underrated thing about the Timberwolves to this point in the season. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend and happy Timberwolves game day. We've made it. 8 days ago was the last time the Minnesota Timberwolves took the court. They are back in action tonight. A lot of the NBA started playing Thursday night. The Wolves are back tonight, and of course also tomorrow, the front end of a back-to-back, taking on the Bucks. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Some stuff to get to. First off, here's some kind of, like capping off the All-Star break, peeking ahead to the final third of the schedule. Want to give some kind of big picture thoughts here with a prompt, a help from Twitter. So we'll get to that here in a minute. A big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X. That's at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right, so before we get to Wolves Bucks towards the end of the show, which I do want to do, I want to start with a prompt and spend actually most of the show here from Steve Jones Jr. on Twitter. He is a former assistant coach of the NBA, video coordinator. He's the one of the two hosts of the Dunker Spot pod, and just a good follow on Twitter. Does video breakdowns frequently. He had posted something earlier this week that I thought was kind of an interesting idea. And I wanted to kind of use that as the majority of the show today. He posed 3 questions on Twitter. He said, what's your biggest concern for your team? What's the biggest biggest question you have for your team? And what's the most underrated thing about your team? So let's play that game with the Wolves. Let's start with what's the biggest concern? What's my biggest concern right now for the Timberwolves? Now, honorable mentions or other things I could have said that I will not say specifically could be turnovers, could be beating bad teams, holding on to leads moving forward. It could be lack of 3-point attempts. It could be complacency, regression defensively. But what I'm going to go with is the late game offense. And I think it also it's not cheating, but it does encompass some of the other stuff, right? The turnovers, the 3-point attempts. But I'm mostly concerned with it in late game scenarios. And here's why. The Wolves have won 39 games before the All-Star break, despite some of the turnover issues. And there aren't all that many of these losses that they lost close games late, strictly because of turnovers. There's actually been a lot more games that have stayed close when they should have been blowouts because of the turnovers. And I talked about this, I think it was even Thursday's show. Golden State won the title a couple years ago by having a team every bit as turnover prone. Actually, I think a little bit more so than this year's Wolves team by rate, by league ranking. They were in the bottom 2 in the league all year in turnover rate. Last year's Nuggets team was bottom 10, bottom third of the league in terms of turnover rate. So you can win with a little bit of a sloppy offense, but can you lock down when it matters most? Can you get the shots you need to get? And turnovers are part of that. The team has overcome some of those turnover issues to this point in the season in the grand scheme of things. And a lot of it's come against bad teams who, like, it's part of it is just, like, let's kick the ball around. We're going to win anyway. That sort of a thing. There have been some issues, turnovers late in close games against good teams. Yes. But that's more about stagnant offense. And yes, turnovers are a byproduct of that. It's not exactly like there's some teams that are ISO heavy that don't turn it over much because they just play ISO ball. And, like James Harden's teams, for instance, like there's teams that, because they don't pass it a ton, they're not like the Warriors turned it over a bunch because they were passing the ball all over the place, playing at a crazy fast pace. This Wolves team plays at a slow pace, but they turn it over because you have Ant trying to play ISO ball in a lot of cases, not all the time, trying to play ISO ball in these situations. But then you also have the Finch voice in the back of his head saying, okay, move the ball, move the ball. And Ant also, he's not a selfish player. He just sometimes starts thinking, okay, I know I'm the best player on the floor. I think of myself as the best player in the game. I'm going to go get a bucket. So he gets tunnel vision, but then it's like he still has this natural inclination to want to make the quote unquote right play. And he gets himself into trouble. And it's not just Ant. Cat, obviously, tunnel vision is a problem for him. It's more with him. It's more of just seeing red, right? Like he just gets ticked off. So he runs guys over, gets offensive fouls. He hasn't been doing the foul out of spite as much lately, but like if he doesn't get a foul on offense, then he immediately fouls defensively because he gets frustrated. He hasn't done that really much this year, but that's an oldie that for Karl-Anthony Towns. He used to do that all the time. So there's some of the silliness mixed in terms of turnovers, but the bigger concern is the actual late game offensive execution. Lack of ball movement has really plagued the Wolves in those situations, and a lot of it does stem from Anthony Edwards trying to take over games in a way that very few players can, and Ant can do it, but it's not plan A, right? Plan A is never let somebody take a long contested mid-range jumper. It was never plan A when D'Angelo Russell did it, right? To think back into recent Wolves history, or Jimmy Butler for that matter, right? Well, maybe when Butler was on the team, it was because there wasn't a whole lot much else going for the team. I guess Towns, obviously. But it's not like it was basically give the ball to Jimmy Butler, right? It's not like that's not plan A. Plan A is to run an actual offensive set and have multiple options. And we've seen the Wolves do more of that lately, and that has helped cut back on turnovers. For the most part. I'm forgetting which game it was, but there was one game where they did run a bunch of plays and they still didn't score. So it wasn't simply, Finch isn't calling plays. It's Finch's fault. There's been a little bit of everything, right? And again, I want to be clear, like the context here, the Wolves still have the best record against above 500 teams of any team in the NBA. They have the second best record of any team in the NBA. They're the second best net rating. So we're talking about, I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill here, but late game execution is obviously a massive deal in the playoffs. It heartens me that the Wolves have actually executed better overall against good teams than they have against bad teams, for whatever that's worth. It makes me feel better about it. But it's the late game offensive execution. Can they consistently run actual offense? Can they get Karl-Anthony Towns involved? Will the Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walkers and Naz Reids of the world hit open threes when they get the opportunity? They lost a couple games recently where the supporting cast just didn't make open shots. And that happens sometimes. Not often with this year's Wolves team. They're third in the league in 3-point shooting percentage. And those guys that I listed have all been great this year. But will they, how many, when they get into the playoffs, there's probably going to be a game when they don't, right? Like, as long as it doesn't become a habit and the execution's there and they're getting those shot attempts up and the shots are there, they put a team around, Tim Connolly's put a team around Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards that should be able to knock down those open threes as long as Ant and Cat are executing in the way that they should. Over the long haul, these open threes should turn into points. So it's really the execution of the offense overall, and most of that rests on the shoulders of Anthony Edwards. Obviously, Mike Conley, Karl-Anthony Towns should have a say in this, and I think they will. But the late game offense and the how smoothly can it run is the biggest question for me. Or the biggest concern, I should say. Next is my biggest question, which I'm going to hone in on a player specifically related to that question, and then we'll talk about the most underrated thing about the team before we get to a Wolves Bucks preview. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our new friends over at Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, size, and budget. They'll do all the shopping for you, and it's the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. That's right. You can easily upgrade your wardrobe this year with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that will work for you. You just give your stylist your size, style, and budget preferences, and then you'll order boxes when you want and how you want to with no subscription required. Plus, they'll send 5 just for you pieces, plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. You just keep what works and you send back the rest. Your stylist will always send pieces that are just right, and the fit will be on point. It's like they have Style ESP. I have no idea how they do it, but trust me, they're going to get you. Stitch Fix makes it also easy. A lot of us don't like to shop, but they'll save you that time and effort. Plus, you'll get outfits that make you look good and make you feel really good too. If you don't love something, just send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free with Stitch Fix. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, so my second question, or my second, prompt here today is, what's the biggest question you have for your team? Again, this was prompted by the Steve Jones Jr. on Twitter. I should say it's at Steve Jones 20, the former NBA assistant coach, video coordinator, current co-host of the Dunker Spot pod. He had the question, what's the biggest question you have for your team? And my question now is different than it may have been 3 weeks ago. I could have said, will the defense continue to travel into the playoffs? Will the Rudy Gobert playoff struggles of the past go away? I've talked a lot about that in the past. Could have talked about, more broadly about an Anthony Edwards leap, or, could have talked more late game offense here. But I want to go specifically, yes, to Anthony Edwards, but very specifically his playmaking, quote unquote, leap. Is it real? Now, I don't know that 4 games constitutes any sort of an anything other than a very arbitrary, start and end point. But the Wolves won their last 4 games before the break by double digits, all of them. In fact, 3 of the 4, 21 points or more. And Anthony Edwards, over those 4 games, averaged 6.5 assists to just 1 turnover. Or, because it's 4 games, we could just tell you the total. It was, if I can do my math better than how let's see. Okay. 26-4, I believe. Did I do that right? Yeah. 26-4 assist to turnover over the last 4 games before the break. You could go back even further, go all the way back to the beginning of January, and his assist rate is up. His assists per game are up. In fact, in the final 15 games before the All-Star break, Anthony Edwards had 5 or more assists in all but 4 games. So in 11 of 15 games, he had 5 or more assists. And he had a 7 assist game, an 8 assist game, a 9 assist game, an 11 assist game, and a 12 assist game, all the way going just back to January 18th, which is the last 15 games before the break. Is the Anthony Edwards playmaking, quote unquote, leap for real? It's entirely possible. I mean, back at the beginning of the season, he looked like more of a willing passer, but was struggling even more with turnovers. Lately, the turnovers have still been there, but so have the assists. And there were a couple games. There was one, I think it might have been, which game was it? Was it the Houston game where he only had 1 assist? There was a game, or maybe it was the Portland game where he only had 2 assists. It was one of the games where he actually didn't have very many. I think it was the Portland game where he only had the 2 assists. The one game in the last 4 where he didn't have a gaudy assist total, where it was like he drew the double team, knew exactly where he was going to go with the ball, and intentionally took like an extra 2 dribbles, further away from the middle of the floor, kind of down into the left wing, elbow extended, just to suck the defenders further that direction, and then turned and made a perfect bounce pass, just kind of curled a perfect bounce pass around, like reverse pivoted and threw it to Nas for a wide open 3-pointer. He knew what he was going to do that whole time, but because he thought ahead, he drew that. Like, that's not a play that we've seen Anthony Edwards make with consistency. Usually it's I'm attacking. Now I'm in trouble. I'm going to telegraph a skip pass, or I'm going to try and force this pass to Rudy down low. This was, he knew the whole time, hey, I'm not going to shoot this. I'm going to swing this back to Nas, but I'm going to draw the defense because they think I'm going to shoot it, because that's usually what I do. But he had pre-decided what he was going to do there. We've seen the chemistry with Rudy Gobert improve a little bit. He's still, far behind Cat and Conley in terms of assists to Rudy, or Rudy buckets assisted by ex-player. Ant, I think, is third. He's well behind Conley and Cat. But that chemistry's improved a little bit. Ant's driving kick game has certainly improved a little bit. And just overall operating in pick and roll has seemingly got a little bit better too. Last year, it improved. Again, we see the turnover rate continue to increase, but as long as the scoring efficiency and the assists go up, it's okay to have the turnovers go up a little bit. And that's another reason why I'm not overly concerned about the overall team turnover issues, because how much of this is Ant just having the ball in his hands more often, and his scoring efficiency's improved. Like, he's more efficient when he shoots the ball this year. Shot profile, drawing fouls, 3-point attempts, etc. That stuff's all better. It's just he's turning it over a little too much. But he's also assisting it at a much improved rate. And you can live with the turnovers if the other stuff is there too. The assist rate is up almost 6 points this season. From year 1 to year 2, it jumped about 3 points, nearly 3 points. From year 2 to year 3, it jumped about 2 points. From year 3 to 4, his leap has been assists. It's been passing. Nearly 6 percentage points better assist rate. The true shooting percentage is up. The free throw rate's way up. All that stuff's great. And the turnover rate, by the way, we're wringing our hands about this. It's actually just a tick lower than it was last year. So it's not worse. The usage rate's up almost 3 points, but the turnover rate's slightly down. The assist rate's up. The overall offensive efficiency is up. Now it's just, can we trim back a few of those long mid-range jumpers, those long twos, and replace those with threes? And can we have a little bit more defensive consistency? To be clear, he continues to improve every single year. He's gotten incrementally better on defense. I want to be very clear about that. The consistency could improve just a little. I'm nitpicking now, right? My biggest thing here is the playmaking mini leap, if you will, for real. Because everything else is there. 39% from three, we'll take that. Nearly 52% on 2-point attempts. We'll take that. Free throw percentage, up almost 9 points from last year, 8.5 points. And all of the above, the assist rate up, you can deal with the turnover rate because of that. So that's my biggest thing with Ant is this playmaking thing real? Because if it is, this team's going to be a top tier offense very quickly. All right, let's cruise right into the most underrated thing about the Wolves. I'm going to give you one, and then I'm going to give you a bonus. So we'll start. We'll start with the one. Shooting. I bet, when I think of underrated, I think of something that a casual fan or even a big fan of another team wouldn't realize until they go and dig into the numbers, or Wolves fans, even plugged in Wolves fans might not realize, unless you're pouring over the stats, that the Timberwolves are actually have the third best 3-point percentage of any team in the NBA this year as a team. You wouldn't think it because of all the hand-wringing over the offense overall, and also because they don't shoot enough threes, which is the bigger issue. They're 24th in 3-point attempts per game, 19th in 3-point attempt rate. But this team is a great 3-point shooting team. I mean, Conley shooting a career-high 44%. Cat's nearly at 44% now. Both of them are shooting more than 4 attempts a game. Nas is a career-high 42%. Ant is nearly at 39%, also a career high. And you got a few guys around league average. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 37.6%, which is still one of the better marks of his career. Jaden McDaniels is down significantly from the 40% last year. He's a shade under 36%. But catch and shoot wise, I think we know he's a pretty good, he can hold his own. The only guys that really drag this down are the guys that aren't there anymore. Shake Milton was 26%. Troy Brown was just a shade under 36%. He didn't play enough for that to really matter. And then Kyle Anderson, right? 22%. And his minutes have been cut back a little bit. I think Monte Morris will help that number. So I don't think if you pulled a random 10 other fans of other teams, that I don't think anyone would realize the Wolves are this good of a three-point shooting team. But they are. All right, I have a bonus for you for an underrated thing, and then we'll get into the Wolves Bucks preview. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouring the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. Let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Let's go with Trey Mann. Trey Mann is the Hornets' primary point guard. LaMelo Ball's status is still up in the air. So Mann needs to be grabbed in fantasy leagues. I mean, the Hornets, no Gordon Hayward anymore, of course. It's going to be a volume play to get Trey Mann, as he is their point guard moving forward. So pick up Trey Mann if you can in your league. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. My first vehicle was a 95 Mercury Tracer. I loved it. I took decent care of it for a high school and college kid. If eBay Motors had been around at the time, if I'd known to use it, some major ifs there, my Mercury Tracer would have lasted a whole lot longer, because I did really like that car. Whatever car you drive now, your number one ride or die, head over to eBay Motors. They can help you out with over 122 million parts there for your number one ride or die. You can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, here's my bonus underrated thing about the team. You guys have heard me say this before. I think it's underrated just how dominant this defense is. I'm not going to completely harp on it, because I've mentioned it a bunch this week and over the past several weeks. But only only one team in the last 10 years has had a defense that is more dominant in terms of the difference, the delta between the number one ranked defense in the league and the number two ranked defense in the league. And it was like the Spurs in 2016. One time in the last decade. There's only one other team that's close too. There's I think the Wolves are 2.5 points per 100 possessions better than Cleveland, according to Cleaning the Glass. And there was another team that was 2.2. The Spurs advantage over the number two team in 16 was, I think it was 3.1 points per 100 possessions. So just how dominant the Timberwolves defense is, it's fun to be like, oh yeah, they're the best defense in the league. But really look at how dominant they've been and how many teams they've held under 100 points and how many good teams they've done this to. And I can count on one hand probably the number of games, just off the top of my head, that they've just completely kicked away with horrible defense. The Atlanta game, game 2 of the year, the Phoenix game, I think just their second loss, which was a road back-to-back. I think one of the Dallas games where Dallas went small and the Wolves just couldn't figure it out for whatever reason. There's very few games where the Wolves have just been miserable defensively. And besides that, they've been locked down. And it's more than just being the number one defense. It's just how dominant they've been. All right. Let's look at that Bucks matchup. So the Timberwolves have the Bucks. They just beat Milwaukee, a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, right after the deadline. And there was no Damian Lillard in that game, and there was no Chris Middleton. Middleton, I believe, is questionable for this game, but it kind of sounds unlikely that he's going to play. So obviously with Dame and with Giannis, or with Dame on the floor, Giannis played last time, but with Dame on the floor, things do get more challenging. But no Chris Middleton also makes a huge difference. Now, under Doc Rivers, the Bucks are just 3-7. After losing to the Wolves, they beat the Hornets and Nuggets. The Nuggets win, obviously a good one. The Hornets won, whatever. But then they lost by 26 to the Heat, and then they lost to the Memphis Grizzlies right before the break, which is horrific. Now they come to Minnesota Friday night at Minnesota, coming out of the All-Star break. And then their next game is a matinee on Sunday afternoon in Philadelphia, which no Joel Embiid. Philly, I think, just lost, if I'm not mistaken, Thursday night, a tough one to the Knicks. So I don't know. I don't know that they're going to look ahead past the Wolves. They shouldn't. The Wolves are the best team in the West. But it's a challenging schedule for Milwaukee. Coming out of the break's always tough. And Middleton is very much questionable for this game. The way the Wolves beat the Bucks last time was they swarmed Giannis defensively. And by swarmed, really what they did was they kind of created a wall in a sense, kind of like the old Stan Van Gundy clip, right? When he's yelling at his guys on the bench at the Pelicans, create a wall with some additional colorful language. That's basically what the Wolves did. It was, hey, let's throw size at him. And then when he inevitably, gets around some size, we'll have some more size. And they did a little bit of Kyle Anderson, a little bit of Jaden McDaniels. They had Rudy guard him a little bit. They just kind of switched it up. Obviously happy to let Giannis shoot from 18, 19 feet and out. But if he gets into the paint, he's like something crazy, like 70% or something in the paint. Just don't let him get in the paint. Overwhelm him with size as much as you can. He ended up shooting 7 free throws in the game, but he was just 3 of 7 at the line. He committed 3 turnovers. The Wolves did an awesome job of limiting him, and they pulled away in the third quarter. They were up 7 at halftime in that game. They were up 10 at halftime, and they ended up pulling away in the third quarter, up 27 going to the fourth, and won the game by 24 points. It was the tenacity that they played defense against Giannis, and also the job they did on the defensive glass was really big in this game. Overall, they were +8 in the rebounding category, and they overwhelmed Milwaukee with their own offense. Minnesota did in this game. They shot 55% from the field and 51% outside the arc. This was the crazy Mike Conley, 6 of 7 on threes. Cat was 4 of 6 on threes in this game. And Rudy did an awesome job in the paint as well. So the key against Milwaukee, it really is just throw as much size as Giannis as you can. It becomes trickier, of course, if Damian Lillard plays. Without Lillard on the floor, the Bucks have some good shooters, but the key is force the ball out of Giannis's hands and or allow him to shoot jumpers, but don't let him into the paint. Beyond that, obviously Dame can hurt you, but if there's no Chris Middleton, it's game planning for Giannis. And Beasley had a terrible game against his former team, of course. So who knows? That could happen again. He shot 1 of 13, 0 of 9 on threes in this game against Minnesota. And that killed the Bucks. But Giannis, of course, 25% from 3. Outside the paint, he's a mediocre at best shooter. But the trick with Milwaukee is that they're a good 3-point shooting team, and they're good at drawing fouls and making their free throws. So, can you find that right mix where you're physical enough, but you're not putting them on the line consistently? That's the concern. They're still a top 5 offense in this league. But with no Middleton, I think the size really mucks things up, and it gives the Wolves a real shot to beat the Bucks again. I actually don't mind the way, because of the Wolves' size, and also the fact that they're pretty mediocre. The Bucks are a mediocre defensive team. I don't mind the way the Wolves match up with Milwaukee. All right. Quick programming note. So during the day on Friday, ESPN's on location, which is why this is a 9 p.m. Central tip Friday night. ESPN's doing several shows. I believe First Take with Stephen A. I think the NBA show in the afternoon are all being done from Minneapolis. So tune into that if you can during the day on Friday. After the game Friday night, we will be doing the live postcast from, or I'll be doing the live postcast. I'll be hosting it, actually. I believe we'll have Tyler Metcalf from Canasupis on the show. That postcast will only be live on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. They're doing some maintenance on the back end over the weekend here at Locked On Wolves on the audio side. So we're not going to get the audio posted over the weekend for either Friday night's postcast or Saturday. So you have to catch it live on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, and then after the fact, also on YouTube. Again, I'll be hosting Friday's show. I believe Luke will be back on Saturday to host with either Tyler or Jack. So tune in after the games Friday and Saturday. I'll be back on Monday. We'll kind of recap the weekend, talk high points and low points from both Friday and Saturday's games. The Wolves have Milwaukee on Friday, Brooklyn at home Saturday. That's an 8 p.m. tip. We'll talk about both games on Monday's show and get you ready for the Wolves game Monday night as well, as they continue this 7-game homestand. So plenty upcoming here in the coming days. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at B Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.